Good morning, students from the Jamaica School of Preaching and Biblical Studies in Kingston, Jamaica, and to all of you who are joining us on YouTube, welcome. This is our final class for this trimester in Introduction to Biblical Apologetics. And today we're going to be reviewing again for the final exam next week. Let us go to God in prayer. Father in heaven, we give you thanks for what we have learned thus far in our study of how to defend the faith of Christ. Lord, you can see the faith of Christ and agnostics, and from people who may believe there is a God but do not really want to be accountable to you for how they live. And so they try to find faults with the Bible and cast doubt on it as being a reliable source of information. We pray that you may help us to retain in our minds all that we have learned and will learn, and that we may use what we are learning to help others to come to have faith in you and in the Bible and in Jesus, your Son. We pray, dear God, your blessing upon this revision, and help us, O Lord, that we will remember it not just for the exam, but for life. In Jesus' name, amen. We are reviewing lessons 16, 17, and 18, and after that I will put on the PowerPoint for reviewing lessons 19 and 20. Lesson number 16 is entitled The Presuppositional Argument for the Existence of God. Lesson 17 is the design argument for the existence of God, and lesson 18 is the existence of the universe argument for the existence of God. I will be focusing on what you need to remember for the final exam. I will not be going through every part of these lessons, but only on the parts that you need to concentrate on to do well in the final exam. I will bypass the general objectives and specific objectives and get right to what you need to know. The first thing that you need to know from lesson 16 is the definition of the word presuppositional. Now, has everyone signed the register? All right, who has year 3? Good, good. And Brother Maxine, you have signed year 2 already? Good, good. The first thing you need to know for the exam next week is the meaning of the word presuppositional. Now let us break that word down. It is broken down into 2 parts. The first part is the word pre, or part of the word pre, P-R-E. And pre means before. Like in any other word, preview means to see before. Predict, pre means before, and dict means to say. So predict means to say before, to say that something will happen before it happens. So pre means before. And 2, the word suppositional. The key to understanding the word suppositional is the word suppose. When you ask somebody, do you suppose that the Jamaica School of Preaching and Biblical Studies is a first-class educational institution? You're asking for what they think. You want to know their view. What do they consider is the quality of education in the school of preaching? Suppositional, therefore, has to do with what a person thinks. It means thinking. It refers to a view that a person has at the beginning, which is assumed to be true before any information is looked at, which may either prove or disprove the assumption. It is the same as what we say in Jamaica is a preconceived idea. Pre means before, conceived means what you think about. An idea, of course, is something that you are considering. A preconceived idea which a person has before he has investigated the idea to find out if it is correct or incorrect. It is also known as a worldview. That is a core set of beliefs. Core means central. A central set of beliefs by which a person interprets every information that he hears, sees, reads, touches, tastes, feels, and experiences around him. It is the starting point of view from a person who's an issue. I'm going to give you a real live illustration. For the past several days, I have been having almost a non-stop debate with an atheist on Facebook. And I'm going to give you an idea of a presupposition of an atheist. I was telling him that one of the arguments for the existence of God is that there is scientific foreknowledge in the Bible. And I gave the example of Genesis chapter 17, verse 12, of God saying to Abraham, every 8-day-old male child that is born in your household shall be circumcised. And I pointed out that 3,900, let me see if I have it right. 3,939 years later, there was a medical research done by a doctor called Doisy, D-O-I-S-Y. And this doctor discovered that the blood clots the fastest on the 8th day after birth. Now, this information was not previously known, not even by Abraham and the Hebrews that descended from him. All they knew was that God expected that the operation of circumcision be done on the 8th day after that male child is born. That's all they knew. God didn't tell them why. He just told them the 8th day is the day. No other day, just the 8th day. But 3,939 years after God told Abraham this, a medical researcher discovers the blood clots the fastest on the 8th day. So that really shows us that the 8th day was the best day for the circumcision to take place. For when the child begins to bleed, the bleeding is going to stop faster than at any other time in the child's life. And so that was the best time. But the Hebrews were not told why, except that God commanded it. And so in faith, they did what God said. Now the atheist replied to me by saying, even if they did not know that the blood clots the fastest on the 8th day. They would have seen some connection between the operation being done on the 8th day, that it was better than any other day that they had experimented with. In other words, through trial and error, experimenting with different days, they came to find out that the 8th day was the best day for the operation, without knowing the details of why it was the best day, and that the medical researcher in 1939 discovered that the blood clots of Costas supplied the scientific information. Now, what do you think that atheist has done? Even though there is no evidence to back up what he is saying, for the Bible nowhere tells us in the history of circumcision among the Hebrews that they were experimenting with different days to see which day would be the best day for the operation to take place. The first time circumcision is mentioned in the history of the Hebrew people is in Genesis chapter 17, when God makes the covenant of circumcision with Abraham and his descendants. And nowhere from Genesis chapter 17 to Malachi do we find in the history of the people of Israel that they were experimenting with different days after the child is born to see which day is the best day for the operation. But what the atheist has done is that his presupposition is, 1, there is no God. 2, God did not tell Abraham to circumcise his male descendants on the 8th day. 3, since God did not tell Abraham that, Abraham and his descendants discovered the 8th day through a process of trial and error. So what he has done is he has started out with these presuppositions. No God, God therefore didn't tell Abraham anything, and what is written in the Bible didn't go that way. The people just discovered it on their own, even if they didn't know the scientific details of why it was that the 8th day was the best day. That's what I mean by presuppositional. So presuppositional means what a person is thinking at the very beginning, which is going to be what he or she uses to interpret anything you say to them and cause them to have their own different explanation from the one you're giving to them. That's what you call presuppositional. Okay? So you need to know the meaning of presuppositional. Any question on the word presuppositional? Anything that is still not clear in your mind about the use of the word presuppositional? Okay, now the next part of the final exam next week is that you must be able to take one inconsistency of the atheist's presuppositions and explain why it is inconsistent, for the purpose of making you be able to have the knowledge to choose the one that you prefer to use. I've included the 4 inconsistencies of the atheist presuppositions, but in the exam itself, you will only be required to use any one. It doesn't matter, any one of these in answering your question. Now let us look at these one by one. Number 1, atheists use logic or reason to prove, or maybe I should say to try to prove, that there is no God. And maybe I should also say not logic, but illogic. That is, what they're saying doesn't really make sense. But this is inconsistent, even if they use logic. It is inconsistent with their presuppositions. And here is why using logic as an atheist to prove there is no God is inconsistent. For if there is no God, logic or reason does not exist. Let that sink into your minds for a few seconds. If there is no God, logic or reason does not exist. And here is why. If everybody's brain evolved by chance or accident or randomness, then there cannot be any one correct way of reasoning, since each brain would have a different way of reasoning. Let me elaborate on that. In order for there to be consistency in how a person reasons correctly, it means that there must have been some intelligent being who made the brain a particular way in order that a person may have the inherent or internal ability to reason correctly. In other words, we are born with that ability to reason correctly. But if everything was left to chance and to random natural processes, the nerves would have come together in different ways in your brain, and the hormones would have also come together in different ways rather than in one and the same way. How can you expect everybody in the whole world to reason one particular way, which you say is the correct way of reasoning, when everybody's brain, according to the atheist presupposition, evolved by chance or accident? Throughout the discussion I had on Facebook with this atheist, he was always appealing to logic. And he would tell me, Mr. Buckland, you are not reasoning correctly on this matter. Or, Mr. Buckland, you have unknowingly made an argument against the existence of God by using design, implying a designer. He was using different logical terms. And I had to point out to him, if there is no God, then using logic in trying to prove that there is no God is inconsistent. How could there be one way of thinking correctly? That you can say, oh, Mr. Buckland, you're not thinking correctly. You have made an error in your reasoning. How can he appeal to a worldwide standard of correct reasoning if his brain and my brain evolved differently, are wired differently, to think differently? How could there be any one consistent, uniform, standard, worldwide for correct reasoning called logic? It is inconsistent with the atheist presupposition that there is no God and no designer and no creator. That is one inconsistency. The second inconsistency, look at number 2. Atheists refer to science, and I put that in quotation marks, because by science is often meant not what you observe, not what you experiment and test and then write down your findings, but a theory about how everything came to be. And that theory is evolution. Evolution, strictly speaking, although it is popular with the scientific community, it is not based on observational science, and therefore it is technically incorrect to call it science. It's more a philosophy called naturalism or materialism than it is actually something based on observation, experimentation, and recording one's findings. But anyway, atheists refer to evolution as science to prove that there is no God. But science does not exist where there is randomness, chance, or accident. Randomness does not produce consistency. And without consistency, there cannot be any scientific law. Let me illustrate for the viewers and the students. I am going to experiment with the law of gravity. Now, for this law of gravity to be a scientific law, it has to produce the same result over and over again. At least where we are on this earth. It has to produce the same result. So let me try. Ready? Okay. I came right back down. Let me try it again. I came back down again. Let me just give one more try. I came back down again. It's a scientific law. It works every time. At least right here on this earth, it works. So you know it is a law by observation. I keep jumping up and I keep coming back down. It happens over and over again without exception. It is a law. But if everything in the universe came into existence and operates by random processes without any intelligent being designing and planning and creating things to operate consistently, how could there be any scientific law? What you should observe, if this were really so, that everything came about by chance, is that at least one time I should have floated up to the ceiling and bounced my head rather than coming back down on the floor. And then you couldn't really say it was a law. But when you say something is a law, it means that it consistently happens. Okay, so when atheists refer to science to prove there is no God, it is inconsistent because without God, there can be no science. Let me tell you something, viewers. No scientist has ever made any scientific law. They have discovered the law, but they didn't make it. And if there were no law, they would not be able to make any discovery. The laws were already there thousands of years before any scientist was around. So no scientist has made any scientific laws. Where did the laws come from? They must have come from a rational, intelligent being. And that is God. So atheists are inconsistent when they appeal to science to prove that there is no God. A third inconsistency of the atheist presuppositions is atheists claim that there is no God, for they think that the only reality in the universe is matter, or that which is physical, tangible, and can be seen. But did you know that there are immaterial things? There are intangible things, such as information. There is a well-known professor of physics in Australia who has gone on public record to say, and I quote, "There is no known law of physics that tells us how information could have been produced by stupid atoms." He even referred to atoms as being stupid, because he's speaking from the point of view that there was no intelligent being who made the atoms. The atoms are really not stupid either. There are a ratio of 1 to 1,836 electrons to protons in each atom. And if this ratio were less, or if this ratio were more, one atom would not be able to join another atom to form any molecule in the universe. There would be no matter, and therefore there would be no physical things that you could see. And so we find that there is information, and physicists like Paul Davies from Australia admits that no person knows how information got to be in the DNA. And it's not just that. How could so much information go in the DNA and fit into such a tiny space? No human being has ever managed to store such a lot of information in tiny space like that. There's so much information in the DNA that volumes of books could be written from what is in the DNA. Where did that information come from? It didn't come from the material substances that you find it in. All we know from experience is that information comes from a mind. That's all we know. And if it comes from a mind, there must have been someone who was a great thinker, who was able also to do marvelous technological feats, to be able to compress such a large amount of information in the tiny space of each cell in our body, and each cell in animals, and each cell in vegetation. Did you know that is the very foundation of life? There could be no formation of any part of the body without the information being there, because it is based on the information that the body parts are made, starting from within the womb of the woman. It is based on information. Where did that come from? Information is an immaterial thing. What about the thoughts? We are thinking constantly. Many things are going through your minds right now that I can't even hear. You can't touch the thoughts. Oh, here is one of Tito's thoughts. So let me just take it here, and let me see if I can understand what he's thinking. Oh, Reuben's thoughts are right here. Enrico's thoughts are right here. You can't feel it. You can't see it. It's immaterial. Are you saying that thoughts don't exist because they are immaterial? Logic. I just spoke about logic. A correct way of reasoning that everybody is born with, but so many don't use it properly. That's not material. What about morality? The atheist is quick to tell me you're not right in what you're saying. But how does he know what is right? Is that material? Isn't it immaterial? Many people are campaigning for human rights. LGBT wants same-sex marriage to be legalized in Jamaica and throughout the Caribbean and the rest of the world. They think that they're not getting equal human rights. Well, human rights are not material either. It's a concept of what is just and fair. These immaterial things exist, but they should not exist if there is no such thing as an immaterial entity. God is an immaterial entity. He's not physical. He is spiritual. And if you deny that all immaterial entities are non-existent, then why do you accept information in the DNA? Why do you accept thoughts, one way of reasoning correctly, morality, and rights? The fourth inconsistency in atheist presuppositions is atheists claim that there is no God, but they believe that there is right and wrong. The atheist presuppositions do not allow for right versus wrong, but for choices based on individual preferences. Let me illustrate. I was attending a meeting of LGBT supporters. I am not an LGBT supporter, so let's get the record clear. But I wanted to find out what they were discussing in the hope that I could call them to repentance. And I asked one of the presenters, who is a lecturer at the University of the West Indies, who designs curriculum for the educational institution, would it be homophobic for me to tell you that you must repent of your homosexuality and return to Jesus Christ? I could hardly even finish what I was saying. There was an uproar at the University of the West Indies. There was a woman, an elderly woman, that I was sitting near to, and when I was about to take my seat, she started to condemn me, not silently. She started to condemn me so viciously. And when I looked into her eyes, she looked like if she had a knife, she would stab me and kill me on the spot. And I tell you, these people can get really savage and vicious when you say something that deals with what they think is so important to them. And the lecturer that I was asking to tell me if it is homophobic, because I've heard different definitions of homophobia. So since they are the experts, I wanted to hear from them what they think is homophobia. Does telling a homosexual that homosexuality is a sin mean that you are being a homophobic, or you have homophobia? Well, I found out that even that is homophobia. And the lecturer said, well, another lecturer, not here, commenting on what I was asking, he said to me, You cannot look at things in terms of whether it is right or wrong. You have to look at things in terms of what are your choices. Some people choose to be this or to be that. And then I realized he's being consistent. Many are not consistent. They speak about it is wrong for you to say that homosexuality is a sin. It is wrong to deny them of equal rights to marriage as those who are of the opposite sex have. They use the term right and wrong. But this other lecturer at the university said, it is not a matter of right and wrong. It is a matter of choices based on a person's preference. And he is exactly right in terms of the atheist worldview. He's not right in the sight of God, but he's consistent with his atheistic worldview. That it is not a matter of right and wrong, but it is a matter of choices based on individual preferences. That is more consistent with atheism. Further, there can be no right and wrong that applies to everyone, everywhere, but these ideas come from the individual instead of coming from a God outside of the individual who determines what is right and wrong for everybody, whether they agree with him or not. Now here it is, they tie themselves up because there are atheists that don't like certain things that we don't like. They don't like people killing each other. They don't like people stealing from each other. Yet, who are they to say to the person who steals from another, you're doing something wrong, when that is the person's choice, based on their own individual preference? Why are you going to condemn him as doing something wrong when in your own mind you think there is no God who has said, thou shalt not steal? And you have made it a matter of individual choice. And if this boy chooses to steal because he is hungry, then why are you going to tell him it is wrong to steal? Why are you going to condemn Adolf Hitler for killing 6 million Jews between 1939 and 1945, when it was Hitler's preference, it was his choice to rid the world of Jews because he thought that they were not up to standard with the German people, with their German race. There are people who think like Hitler right now. Margaret Sanger, back in the early 20th century, invented condoms. You know one of the reasons she has given for the invention of condoms? Let me get to the camera so you can see my face quite well. She invented the condoms because she thought there were too many black people in the United States. She thought that the black people were an inferior race and that they were producing too many children. And she was afraid that the United States would be filled with black people. So she encouraged black people to use condoms to try to reduce the birth rate among them. Many of you didn't know that. But it is the same idea Hitler had about some races like Jews. He thought that they were unsuitable, continue to exist, that he should get rid of them so that the human race could be purified of inferior peoples. Now that was Margaret Sanger's individual choice, but was it right? Many of you atheists would say that's not right. That's being color prejudiced. You're exactly right. But why do you argue about right? If there is no God who determines what is right and wrong for everyone, regardless of how the individual feels about it, then why do you condemn Margaret Sanger for being prejudiced against black people? She was wrong, yes, but I can say she was wrong because I believe there is a God who says he's no respecter of persons. But in every nation he that feareth him and worketh righteousness is acceptable to him. Acts chapter 10, verses 34 and 35. So the atheists really tie themselves up where morality is concerned, because inherently, instinctively, God has put his laws on the hearts of every human being. And no matter whether you believe in God or not, you can't escape from the internal conviction. Some things are right and other things are wrong. You can't escape it. And then when you condemn someone for doing what you believe in your heart is wrong, how can you do that? If it is a matter of individual preference leading to an individual choice, whether it is a matter, rather than being a matter of what God says is right or what God said is wrong. So, there can be no right and wrong that applies to everyone everywhere, for these ideas come from the individual instead of coming from a God outside of the individual who determines what is right and wrong for everybody, whether they agree with him or not. So, one inconsistency is using logic which God created to try to prove that there is no God. Another inconsistency is using science which God created to prove there is no God. The third inconsistency is to say that there is nothing immaterial, and so there is no God, and yet you accept many immaterial things without question. Information in the DNA, thoughts, logic, morality, and rights, all of which are immaterial and exist, and yet you deny that God, who is immaterial, exists. And the fourth one, you say there is a right and wrong, and you condemn those who do what you think is wrong, and yet how can you say that there is a right and wrong if there is no universal right and wrong that applies to everyone? If people make their choices based on their preferences, how can you say that that individual's choice is wrong when there is no external outside standard to appeal to say, well, that person made a wrong choice? These are inconsistencies, and for next week's exam, you will only be required to use any of them, any one of them. Any question on any of these inconsistencies in the atheist presuppositions and how they try to argue that God does not exist? Anything that is not clear and you want me to elaborate further? Okay, let us move on. The next possible question that you'll have to look at comes from lesson 17, which is the design argument for the existence of God. You need to know the three molecular machines. I say molecular because they're so tiny, you can't see them with your own naked eye. The eye has to look through not just through a microscope, but a special microscope called an electron microscope. Charles Darwin didn't even know these things existed. Perhaps if he had known that these things existed, he would not have put together his theory of evolution. This is so convincing that there was a famous atheist in England, a foremost atheist by the name of Anthony Flew. who debated one of the ministers of Christ in Tennessee back in, I think it was 1976, and a book was published in 1977 called The Warren Flu Debate, which I have read. But later on, this same Anthony Flew that debated Brother Warren from the Church of Christ, he became a believer in God. You know why? Because he was amazed at the molecular machines that were discovered. He was amazed at the tiny machines. Let's look at the tiny machines. You need to know, even if you're not going to deal with these in detail, at least you need to know the name of the machines we have looked at. ATP synthase and kinesin motor. You need to get those names fixed in your mind. But then you have the choice of looking at only one, any one of these, and explaining how they work and using how they work to prove that there must have been a designer who put it together, that it couldn't have come about by a random accident or chance. DNA. Evolutionists admit that DNA was not produced by the proteins that make up the DNA. Information always comes from a mind. Therefore, this information must have come from a super intelligent mind, and that is from God. If human beings did not design it, and if natural processes which have no mind could not have randomly made it, then it must have been designed by the super intelligent mind, and that is God himself. ATP synthase is what converted Anthony Flew to become a believer in God. He mentioned that in a book that he wrote after he became a believer in God. He wrote a book entitled, There Is a God. But he had the word not included in the title, but he drew a line through the word not, or through the word no. There is no God, and he drew a line through no. And he explained how this convinced him that there must be a God. ATP synthase. This is also one of the molecular machines that is fascinating to me personally. ATP stands for adenosine triphosphate. This is the basic substance needed for life that is produced by the tiniest molecule is in the nucleus of each cell in all living things, whether it be vegetation, animals, or humans. Synthase is a reference to the movement of two main parts of the motor, one part turning the other part very fast and generating electrical power in the cell, which produces the adenosine triphosphate, and which is taken to every part of the cell so that each part of the cell may have the electrical power to function. All parts of this motor are needed in order for it to work. If all of the parts were not present from the beginning, there would have been no life in any living thing. It did not evolve. It must have been designed and created by a super intelligent mind that is God. This one is also fascinating to me. Kinesin motor. Kinesin means moving, from the Greek word kine, which means moving. Motor is an engine that causes movement. Each cell has several robots, which resemble human beings in stick figure, that walk on different pathways and carry behind them a sack or a bag of proteins to addresses at different parts of the cell to deliver specific amounts of protein, the building blocks of living things, which enable a cell to grow and for organs and systems in living things to form. This design shows that there must be a super intelligent mind that is God. Let me illustrate. Just imagine I had a heavy bag on my back and I was carrying it like this. And I am a stick figure. You know what a stick figure is? You have the stick hands, you have the circle for the head, you have a stick going down, separating into two sticks that make the feet. Pretend I'm a stick man. I'm carrying a heavy bag behind me, and there are already different addresses for me to go to. The first stop is keto. I take out of the bag some proteins. Then I take out the bag, and my second address is Orain Ricketts. I put the bag down and give him some amount of proteins. My third address is Enrico, and I put some proteins where he is. You don't want to do it. And my last stop is Robens, give him proteins, and I go back to where I'm coming from. Now that is intelligence. And I did not know for most of my life that these robots were up and down in every cell of my body. That is amazing. I don't have to tell them where to go. I don't have to tell them, remember to carry the bag of proteins. They do it automatically, and they are powered by ATP. The ATP, the electrical power, it's charging them up, and they go with their bag of proteins. That's amazing. How can you look at these molecular machines and say that they came about accidentally? It doesn't make any sense. It does not make any sense. So you need to know the three names for these machines, and you must know some information about any one of them in more detail for your exam next week. We come to lesson 18, the existence of the universe argument for the existence of God. I'm going to look through the whole thing, but the part that you need to focus on is number 5 for the exam, this part here. But let me start with number 1. Here is the argument. The universe has not always existed. 2, everything which has not always existed had a beginning. 3, everything which had a beginning had a cause. Number 4, there are only 2 views about what caused the universe to come into existence. One is atheistic, which says the universe came into existence from nothing. That doesn't make any sense. Nothing has never produced something. Nothing produces nothing. If there were absolutely nothing from the start, I mean absolutely nothing, how could there be anything later on? That's their view, and yet they accuse us as being the only ones to have faith. It takes greater faith to be an atheist, to believe that nothing produced anything, and something so large and orderly and well organized as the universe. Then you have the biblical view. The universe was created by God. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Genesis chapter 1, verse 1. Now here are clues as to which view is right. This part here you really need to concentrate on. Nothing has always produced nothing. The universe shows careful, intelligent, and intentional design. In atoms, there is the ratio of electrons to protons of 1 to 1,836. I'll soon give you the atheist response to that. If this were larger or smaller, atoms would not be able to come together to form molecules, such as water. Well, here is the atheist response to that, which I got recently, a few days ago, when I used this on Facebook. The atheist said, things may have the appearance of being designed. For example, Mr. Buckland, you wouldn't say that the sun actually rises, would you? But it looks like it is rising. It has the appearance of rising. And you wouldn't say that the sun sets, would you? That it actually sets, would you? It looks like it is setting. But what is happening is that the earth is rotating, giving the appearance of the sun rising and setting. And so he applied that reasoning to this ratio here, that it has the appearance of being designed, but that's all there is. It only looks designed, but it's not actually designed. My response to him was, if for argument's sake you are correct, that this was done accidentally, then how do you explain that there is this same ratio in every atom that has ever been found, without exception? That every atom universe found so far has this ratio of 1 to 1,836 electrons to protons. How is that so? If it is only appearing to have been designed rather than actually having been designed, then what you should have found is that you would have different ratios. Some ratios might be more than this, some might be less than that, and some will be that. You know, it is like gambling. You're trying to get a certain set of numbers together. And those that gamble, I don't gamble. Those that gamble hope that the numbers come in a particular order. But sometimes, by chance, you may have it coming in the order that is on your card, your ticket, your paper, and you might win a lot of money. But does that happen all the time, listeners, viewers? Does everybody get lucky and win millions of dollars at one time? It doesn't work that way. If it is a matter of chance, you might get lucky sometime. Very few. Not every atom would have this ratio if it came about by chance. And if it was like that, then you would have a stronger argument to make that it only looks designed, but it wasn't really designed. But when you have every atom having this ratio, you really have to confess some intelligent mind must have put it in that proportion. And for the purpose that it could come together to form molecules. For without this ratio, no molecule would form. Water itself would not form because the nature would not have this specific ratio. The atheist did not respond to that. He went on to another argument. He tried to prove there is no God. He didn't respond to this. Okay, so it's in the right ratio. If this were larger, to come together to form molecules, such as water. Another thing, too, that shows that there must be an intelligent designer is our sun is the right color. If it were redder or synthetic response in vegetation would be weaker. Photosynthetic response means extracting or taking energy from sunlight and mixing it or combining it with carbon dioxide in the air and water and nutrients from the soil and making food for the plant, for the vegetation. If the sun was redder or bluer, it would be too weak for vegetation, green in color, to make its food. And what do you think would eventually die to vegetation? Would eventually happen to the vegetation? Our sun is also the right size. Its brightness would change too quickly, so that when it becomes dim, the earth would freeze, and when it would become bright, the earth would burn up. If it were smaller, the earth would not be able to support life. There are stars that are larger than our sun. Did you know that, class? There are stars. The reason why they look so far away, like much farther than our sun. But there are stars out there that make the sun look tiny. Anyhow we have them to be our sun, we could not be alive today. There would be too much heat, and they would not be stable. Those large hot ball gases tend to be unstable. They get bright suddenly, they get dim suddenly. So when they get bright suddenly, it would be too hot for life to exist. When they get dim suddenly, everything would freeze and there would be no life. Our sun is the most stable ball of gases that we have found so far. The Earth's distance from the sun is crucial for a stable water cycle. The water cycle we have is that the water evaporates from the seas and the rivers and from the vegetation. It goes up into the atmosphere, condenses, and become droplets of water floating as clouds. The sea breeze blows it over land, and it goes over hills and mountains and gets heavy. The droplets become drops, and rain starts to fall. It flows with the rivers, it goes under the ground to form underground water, and some of it goes into the river and flows into the sea again. That's a water cycle. That would not be a regular thing happening if the earth was not at the right distance from the sun. If the earth was too far away from the sun, most water would freeze. If it were too close to the sun, most water would boil. And so everything is so finely worked out, that in a tiny difference, it would really make a difference as to whether or not we could live here on the earth. How could this have happened by accident? It must have been designed by the Creator. Okay, now, in our next session, I will review lessons 19 and 20. I'm going to give you 15 minutes break. Let's say it's now 10:36 and 46. Or about 10:51 or 9 minutes to 11, we will resume. You can just cool off, get water, relax, and come back. We resume at 10:51, God willing.
And then feel protein from every product.
Yes, if he doesn't want the protein.